Hello and welcome to this People's Health Alliance roundtable on nutrition. Today I have a wonderful panel of guests with me, so we're just going to start by introducing them all. So if you would like to just let us know a little bit about your background and what good nutrition means to you. I'm just going to go around my screen, so I'm going to start with Martyn.
Hey, Sarah. Excuse me. So my name is Martyn Chilvers. Professionally, my background has a BSc in sports science physical education from a place called Loughborough University in the UK. But that was in the early 90s. And then after that, I spent actually some time in a commission in the Royal Marines, where I actually helped implement a new physical training routine to help reduce the injuries that everybody was experiencing. After leaving the Marines, I did another degree in Oriental medicine, TCM medicine, part of the training we did in Beijing hospitals, and then did further training in up-ledger craniosacral therapy, visceral manipulation, lymphatic drainage, more training in nutrition, and then finally training in hair tissue mineral analysis, which is what I tend to concentrate on most days now. Personally, that's sort of interwoven because when I was very young, I had very, very bad digestion. I was on antibiotics for a year when I was about 3 years old. I was very, very active, but also quite an anxious child, quite a nervous child, the type of child who would always think it's their fault, even if it isn't. And that sort of stayed with me as I did all my physical work, as I did the Marines, as I got quite a few physical traumas, all that sort of tension and all that stress sort of built up within the body. And I developed a autoimmune condition called vibrational allodynia, which is basically a abnormal response to normal stimuli, where you have a painful response, a severe painful response, to the point where raindrops would be painful, or I couldn't hold my daughter, I couldn't hold my wife. I had other symptoms like leaky gut, constipation, insomnia problems, sleeping problems, detoxification issues, pain throughout the whole body all the time, tension, headaches, migraines, sexual dysfunction, post-orgasmic illness syndrome. The list was long but distinguished, as they'd say in Top Gun. And ultimately, what helped me was a combination of using the hair tissue mineral analysis information to give me a guidance on what supplements would help me to balance the energy and the autonomic nervous system, but also ultimately a animal protein diet, a carnivore diet, is what I sort of combined together. And it was that combination that ultimately started to shift me into and started to heal a lot of these conditions. So if I was going to simplify my dietary approach, not that I consider everyone should do this, but I'm a great believer in high protein, especially animal protein. And for those people who are really struggling, sort of resetting the system with a sort of carnivore type diet.
Amazing, thank you, Martyn. Tarah, you're up next.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me. Like Martyn, I myself have been in practice as an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist for about 17 years. So a lot of my nutrition background comes from that, really looking at nature and the elements and how that can affect, our inner landscape as well. However, I also struggled with chronic illness in my 20s. I was diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I tried so many different things in many ways, but nutrition included. And what I have sort of evolved into, I guess you would say, is more of an intuitive approach. And so every individual is going to be, a lot different in terms of what works for them. So there are certain things for certain conditions and acute instances where we would need to do certain things for maybe a period of time. But I have found, and even when I was, very ill, I found that if I was too absolutist, if I was too strict with myself, it had the opposite effect. So I've really learned to soften a lot. And I also practice as a life coach now and have done a lot of additional studies in, Western herbs and, lots of different kinds of nutrition and things like that. And the most important thing for me when I'm working with, my clients, is to ask them, how are you feeling when you're eating your food? That's like such a huge thing. So, and I also tried, I was a vegetarian for a couple of years. And I remember my Chinese nutrition instructor, he just said, "Oh, Tarah, please eat some meat." So I did. And oh my gosh, immediately felt so much better. So, I second that, Martyn, with high protein. But of course, it depends. It's really everybody's different. So I work with people on a one-on-one individual basis and don't really say anything across the board like this is good or that's good. Obviously things like seed oils and stuff we know are no bueno. But yeah, so that's my nutrition background, and that's the approach I take in most of the work that I do is an intuitive approach.
Thank you, Tarah.
Thanks.
Dr. Kaimi, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and what good nutrition means to you?
Yeah, so it was interesting to hear Martyn's background, that he did a 1 degree in one whole field of study, and then changed course partway through, because that's what I did. My first degree was in computer science, because I actually honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was good at math, so I figured if you're good at math, you can program computers, and you can get a job in that. So that was literally the thought process that went into getting my degree in computer science. And it turned out I was very, very good at it, but I didn't actually like it. And so a combination of factors that one, I had a family member who was ill with that kind of mysterious illnesses that Western medicine can't put its finger on, including chronic fatigue and random pain issues and so on. And she went to a lot of different Western doctors, and they're like, "Oh, well, it's probably in your head," kind of thing, and which wasn't terribly helpful. Acupuncture, and this is back in the 80s, right? So acupuncture really helped her. And I grew up in California. Acupuncture wasn't even legal in California until 1982, I think. And so, we started getting acupuncture around 85. We were the first kids on the block, basically, to try this weird thing. And to be honest, it was weird to me, because I grew up raised by 2 PhD chemists. Then I got a degree in computer science, and my thinking was linear, just logical, linear. That was it. But I ended up taking a shiatsu class, because I'm thinking, hey, if the acupuncture helps, maybe if I did a bit of acupressure to in between acupuncture sessions, that could be like a synergy thing. And I figured out very quickly that even though I didn't understand the theory behind it very well, because it was foreign to me, I liked working with people a whole lot more than working with computers. So I decided to shift gears, train in shiatsu, and basically started doing acupressure. I eventually went to acupuncture school, got my degree and licensure in acupuncture and Chinese herbs. Along the way, I also studied lots of manual therapy things, cranial sacral therapy, visceral manipulation, lymphatic drainage, positional release, all that kind of stuff, because it all seemed to help. And gradually, by working with clients over the years, the principles of Chinese medicine began to make sense to me in my own mind, because the classics are written for a different culture. And as a Westerner, you kind of have to wrap your head around it. But I started really seeing that it was a better way to explain what was going on with people. Is that once you really started to understand it, no matter what somebody showed up with, it started to fit patterns that Chinese medicine described, but Western medicine couldn't. And I started to really see that, bottom line is, all there is chi or energy. And if somebody doesn't have enough energy in general, and then that breaks down to, okay, which meridians don't have enough energy, ultimately that's the cause of disease, is that something's gone wrong and they don't have enough energy or chi, or it's not circulating properly. And that actually explains everything. And so I started thinking, you know what? The thought process around diet should be less about chemistry and more about, when you eat this food, is it going afterwards? Are you going to have more chi or less? And that's really the bottom line. And personally, I hate diets where you have to have lists of things on your refrigerator of what you can and can't eat. And so I have tried to, over the years, distill some of the most important concepts of Chinese medicine as I see them into a few simple rules that if people get that, they can make choices. Because Tarah, I love the thing you said about, like, when you start to overthink the diet and try to be a perfectionist, it goes backwards, because that overthinking, that overworry, depletes the spleen energy, which is what gives energy. That's the meridian that gives energy to the digestion. So it's like one step forward with the good diet and two steps back because you're just thinking too much, right? So that's my motivation in trying to, like, hey, you know what? Just a few simple rules covers most people. And then you have to kind of tailor it for people, a little bit further, who are really ill, and need more help. So that's kind of what nutrition means to me. So
Fabulous. I'm loving the kind of diversity between the panel, but also a nice kind of cohesion as well. Dr. Kristin, would you like to share your background and what good nutrition means to you?
Sure. And I'll start by saying I've had some internet problems, and so I haven't really heard much of what's gone on, although with a little bit from Kaimi just now, I think what I'm going to say will probably step on some toes because I have a little bit of a different take when it comes to what you should and shouldn't eat. But I'll start by saying nobody should actually listen to me at all on the topic of nutrition, because I have an MD after my name, because medical doctors don't actually know or learn anything about nutrition unless they learn it on their own. So if you do take what I'm saying to heart, don't do it because I'm a doctor. But I do think I've come by some hard-won lessons in nutrition. I had Lyme disease about 10 years ago, and I became one of those people that Kaimi talks about who had sort of a mystery, medically complex and very difficult to heal illness, and ultimately found that for me, nutrition became a cornerstone of how I crawled out of that hole. And when I say hole, it was like I couldn't work. I lay in my bed for 5 weeks. I lost 30 pounds. I couldn't pick up or nurse my infant anymore. It was really, I call it my near-death experience because that's what it really felt like. Nutrition wasn't the only thing that got me out of that, but it was a big piece of it. And one of the first things I learned about as I was crawling my way back to health was the comprehensive elimination diet. The comprehensive elimination diet is done in a lot of different ways, but the concept is you strip down your intake to very simple foods that are classically anti-inflammatory, and obviously anything that doesn't agree with you, you would leave out. But you do that for a very limited amount of time. So this idea of the spleen getting pissed off, it would only have to be pissed off for like 3 weeks, Kaimi, because that's how long it takes to really kind of clear the table and clean the gut and heal it and rest it from foods that have become inflammatory for whatever reasons. And after that, you reintroduce things and you see how you feel. And for me, it was just life-changing. I learned that I never probably should have been eating gluten my whole life. All these little minor things that I'd attributed to, growing pains in my knees or belly aches because I was stressed, or gassy, bloaty, farty from digestion. That doesn't happen to me anymore because I eat a diet that my body, on reintroduction of food, said, this is the diet for you. And so at the end of the day, became a very intuitive eater, but certain things I leave out religiously because I know they're non-negotiable for my overall health and well-being. The other thing I'll say about nutrition, other than the elimination diet is like my favorite, hands down favorite DIY tool for kind of jumpstarting health, is that I think of nutrition as encompassing so many more categories other than food. You know, the air we breathe is nutrition. The people we surround ourselves with are nutrition. The connection to the earth and to things we love, that's nutrition for our soul on so many levels. And so I think about nutrition in this very holistic way. And food is almost kind of the simplest piece of it. So those are my 2 cents to start with. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Dr. Kristin. I love how you expanded that sense of nutrition at the end to what nourishes us on much deeper levels, which is very important, you know, from a Chinese medicine point of view as well. I'm just going to go around again and you know, dive a little bit deeper into the kind of dietary guidance from your different perspectives. You know, because we all know the importance of a well-balanced diet, but you know, what is a well-balanced diet? And it may be that there's different takes on that. So I think I'll keep the order the same and start with Martyn again, looking at it from, you know, dietary guidelines from the perspective of, you know, utilizing the hair analysis as a way of, you know, for dietary guidance.
Well, I think to reiterate what everyone's sort of been saying, I don't really like dietary guidelines in the sense of, I think it's too individualistic, especially nowadays with people who are at different levels of functioning. I mean, the hair analysis, what Kiemi and Tarah will love is that the hair analysis is really like a pulse diagnosis or a tongue diagnosis. It's not actually to do with minerals. It's actually to do with energy metabolism. And as I loved what Kiemi said, was that energy metabolism governs everything. You know, you've got to sort out energy because everything else depends on that energy. And what a hair analysis gives you an insight into is that energy metabolism, but in this case, into the cellular level. But then because energy metabolism can't really be separated from parasympathetic and sympathetic activity, because they really manipulate it to determine what you're going to use that energy for and how you're going to use that energy, then it's also a stress analysis of the body. It analyzes the balance between sympathetic, parasympathetic system, how stressed you are, how long the stress has been, how much worn down the body's got, how strong the parasympathetic system is. And then it also gives you insights into sort of some of those stress triggers. And that's where it can start to help, especially with diet. It can give, my own sense of diet is I am animal-based. And again, I loved what Kristin said about elimination diet, because for me, the carnivore diet, I don't look upon it as this fad diet. I look upon it as the ultimate elimination diet, basically. And you're starting at that place with a food, not trying to put words into Kristin's mouth. I'm not saying this is her elimination diet, but for me, that's how I view it. And it's a good starting point. It's nutrient-dense food. It's not got the chemical warfare of plants. You know, it's pretty safe. It's nutritious, and it can start to sort of build the body back up again, heal the gut, help the gut. And then later on, you can start to bring in other foods and experiment with other foods. Now, for me, certain of those foods, I personally would never go to. So I'd never go to gluten. I'd never go to wheat. I don't think those are great foods. But a lot of the other stuff, as long as it's whole foods, as long as it's not processed, refined, messed around with, as long as the ingredient list is literally one thing, like an apple, as opposed to loads of stuff you're going to find on processed foods, then it's really where that person fits in. I look more then for things like, are you hitting your protein needs, your amino acid needs? Because your amino acids are going to build your neurotransmitters. They're going to rebuild your body. They're going to rebuild your peptides, those peptides which then activate stem cells and that. So for me, protein needs is really important. Are you hitting your protein needs? And then where the hair test can give a bit of guidance is, what's your sugar metabolism like? What's your glucose metabolism? What's your ability to balance your blood sugar? Are you more suited to getting your energy substrate from glucose and carbohydrates once you've hit your protein needs and your fat needs? Or are you more best suited to a more ketogenic, more fat-based energy substrate into the body? So the hair test can really get involved there with giving direction about sort of your sugar metabolism, your blood sugar regulation, whether you're on a trend towards diabetes, hypoglycemia, what your protein intake is. Is there more catabolic activity taking place and the body's breaking down more than anabolic? Is there a weakness in stomach acids? And then dietary wise, we sort of apply that in and sort of, but for me, the basis is always animal protein, get your nutrients in, get your basic fat levels in. And then after that, let's see, you know, what type of diet you want to develop after that and what your body tolerates.
You're muted, Sarah.
Thank you. I muted myself because my dog was chasing a rabbit or something outside. Thank you, Martyn. Tarah, would you like to go next? And just wondering how you can get that balanced diet intuitively, because I don't know if this is correct, but you know, I have heard, you know, if there's a sensitivity to food, for example, strawberries, people might be drawn quite intuitively to the strawberries, to the food that they're actually intolerant to. So I just wondered perhaps if you could speak to that a little bit with the intuitive eating as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. And, you know, I do also tend sometimes toward the, you know, the Chinese medicine guidelines as well for nutrition, just because it's very simple and it's very easy for people to kind of grasp. And, oh, I have heat in my body. Okay, let's eat things that are more cooling, or, you know, things like that. So I do, I do tend towards if a client, you know, has what we call blood deficiency in Chinese medicine, as I think most of us on this call, you know, are familiar with. Doesn't mean your blood isn't, you don't have enough. It's just not nutritious enough for you. So then, you know, we would recommend things like meat and things like that. But to your point of, you know, if somebody has an intuition to go towards something, and then it's really experimentation, you know, it's really like, there are wonderful tools like, you know, the hair tool, and even there's so many different ways, different structures, different containers to look at when we look at nutrition. And so if something draws you, if you are like, oh, I'm going to do the Eat Right for my blood type, you know, that's been around for ages, maybe let's try that. And then you're just experimenting and you're listening to your body, seeing how it feels. You're just getting the feedback. So it's also a system of trusting yourself. You learn to build that relationship with yourself and build that trust with yourself. If I'm going to eat something and then, oh, let's see how that goes. And obviously, if somebody's in a really acute stage of illness, you know, there's different recommendations. And okay, let's try to stay away from these things, obviously processed and things like that. You know, like Martyn was saying, let's stick with whole foods. And maybe if you're drawn to something and you try it and then you're like, okay, well, no, that's, you know, that doesn't feel good. And you may not know right away. Of course, I understand that as well. But it really, with intuitive eating, it's, you know, people say, well, what do you mean? How do I do that? And so it can be very subtle, and you're just listening to your body and you're asking, is this a yes or a no in this moment? And you can feel maybe there's an expansion or maybe there's a contraction. And so it really comes down to trusting yourself in that moment, even if maybe you get it wrong and maybe you have something that doesn't feel good, but then, hey, you know. So I know it sounds very simple, but, you know, in working with people, I say too, and I didn't coin this, but, you know, a happy donut is better than a sad salad. So if somebody's like, oh, I'm just going to eat my salad, you know, whatever, and they just feel awful about it, it's your body reacts to that, right? Our body reacts to our thoughts and how we feel about something, how we think about something. I mean, that's not the only thing that's going on, but it is definitely a part of it. And so if you need to go and you need to say, I'm going to eat this box of donuts, you know, and be really happy about it, definitely not a recommendation to do all the time, but go for it and see how you feel. And so, yeah, so it's really the work is more about helping a client actually be able to listen to themselves and listen to what their body is saying, versus, you know, that list, right, of I should and I shouldn't, and I should and I shouldn't, the absolutist sort of mentality. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to in the next question dip some more into the emotional aspects and that kind of trusting self some more, because I find that really, really fascinating. Dr. Kaimi, you spoke a little bit earlier about how you've simplified some of the principles of Chinese medicine, to really kind of make it quite usable. And I just wondered what your guidelines are. I understand there's 3 sort of main guidelines that you have in terms of what to eat or what not to eat.
Right. No, yeah, that's it. I've got 3 main rules, and but they actually go a long ways towards cutting out the food you shouldn't eat, basically. And so I'll explain those in a minute. But like, when Dr. Kristin was talking about the elimination diet and so on, there's just so many things about that resonate with me. But for like a lot of my clients, you know what, they're not so sensitive with their diet that they need to be necessarily cutting out everything and then going back to the introduction. I mean, I think that idea when somebody's really ill, like I think that's what you pretty much have to go, is to something that's very, very, non-inflammatory foods, and then see what you can add in. But my thoughts are, you know what, my personal thing is I don't have a history of chronic illness. I've had chronic illness around me, but I'll knock on wood here, or touch wood, as they say here in England. I haven't had to struggle with chronic illness in my life, but I am getting old, right? So I'm in my mid 60s here. I've got my free bus pass here in London. I qualify and all that stuff. And I don't want to get physically any older than I am. In fact, I'd like to wind the clock back. And so for all of my clients, I like to hold out that idea of that a superior physician helps his clients to prolong their years without the symptoms of aging, and hence to nourish destiny. And so with that in mind, these guidelines work for everybody at a basic level, and then I tweak them for people who are sick. The first guideline is, don't eat stuff that's too cold. And I'll give the logic behind it right away. We know from radiographic studies that when you put cold food or cold drink in your stomach, some ice water or some ice cream, as extreme examples, but anything cold, when you lower the stomach temperature below body temperature, it stops moving. And because the stomach is connected to the rest of the intestines by the enteric nervous system, you put your entire digestive tract into paralysis every time you eat or drink something cold. And boy, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, which I used to be, by the way, because I've worked on spaceborne applications and so on, right? So to think that's not good for you, right? To put your whole digestive tract into paralysis. And now that creates digestive stagnation, which can lead to distortions of the gut microbiome, because you get bacterial overgrowth and so on from the stagnation, basically. So that's a whole host of issues. But where does your body get the heat from to warm up the stomach back up to body temperature so it can start working again? It draws that heat from the renal arteries, the arteries that feed the kidneys. And so you literally rob qi from the kidneys every time you eat something cold. And so, that's the first guideline, is why, and kidney qi is like your reserve life force. So every time you drink something cold or eat something cold, you're shortening your life, right? You're spending your reserve life force that's supposed to be there for you when you're old, basically, so you don't age too quickly. And the first part of that is the most obvious, is don't eat stuff that's physically cold or really physically cold, or drink stuff that's physically cold. But some foods are very cooling. And so in Chinese medicine, there's a concept of pre-digestive temperature and post-digestive temperature. The pre-digestive is it warm or is it cool, right? Post-digestive is after you eat it, does it tend to cool you down or warm you up or leave you neutral? Well, vegetables tend to be cooling. And so, you can eat too many vegetables because it's very cold, and you end up draining your qi because you're eating this cooling food. Even if you cook your veggies, which I recommend over salads, right? But even if you cook them, they're still energetically a bit cold. And so, look, for most of my clients, I think cooked vegetables in moderation makes for a nice balanced plate of food. And it's the carnivore diet can be very healthy for people, but it's hard for a lot of people because it's very limited. So, and but and the cooking helps to overcome the defense mechanisms that plants have that Martyn was referring to, right? So not all of them, but it helps to break down some of the chemicals that plants have to discourage animals from eating them. And that's a reality. So, but hey, you know what? That can get complicated. And I don't like having to explain that to clients. So I just say, look, don't eat cold. And look, from your symptoms, we really need to be careful about eating cold. So I want you to either, cut down your vegetables and definitely cook them, maybe with some ginger to warm them up. Or for some people, I say, let's take the vegetables out and see what happens, and then maybe we'll introduce them when you're a little bit better, and we'll see which ones you are sensitive to and which ones you aren't. All right, so that's the not too cold. The next one is not too sweet, because anything that's too sweet injures the spleen qi. And the spleen is what gives energy to our digestion and energy to our immune system. So when we let our spleen qi deplete, well, that old saying, it takes money to make money, right? If you don't have enough qi to digest your food, it's hard to get qi out of your food, right? So we need to protect this, not just the kidney qi, but to protect the spleen qi. And so things that are sweet weaken the spleen. Now, when we crave sweet, our body's actually saying we need nourishment. You go back a few thousand years, and look, what there was, you could catch something and eat it. That's animal protein. And maybe you could find some berries or maybe some plants that you could nibble on and so on. But, sweet meant nutritious. And the flavor of meat in Chinese medicine is sweet. And vegetables are sweet, but they also usually have some bitter, right? That's the chemicals that make them sometimes hard to digest. And so the not too sweet cuts out anything with sugar in it. It also says, hey, don't have very much grains, because grains, like you eat a slice of white bread, it goes into your bloodstream as a blood sugar spike just as faster than just eating sugar straight out of the sugar bowl, right? So that's not good for you. That's really bad. And I could try to explain all the effects on insulin regulation, and that's important, but for most of my clients, it goes over their head. And so I just think, look, you're weakening your life force that allows you to get energy out of your food if you eat that. And for some people, they can have a little bit of grains. And for some people, whether or not they don't necessarily have to be diagnosed as celiac to be somebody who shouldn't be eating wheat, not just because of the gluten, but because it's very sweet. Wheat is sweet, basically. And it's a lot of carbohydrate in a very small amount of food. And so not too sweet covers not having too much fruit, like fruit juices, It covers having, not having too much grains. For some people, I tighten that up to no grains because they're too reactive to grains. So, but it limits the amount of sweet. And that goes a long ways towards eliminating problem foods. Oh, you know what? Let me back up to the not too cold. Dairy, full fat dairy can be great from a macronutrient perspective, but it's cold. It's cold on the digestion. And so for some people, it's very hard to digest because it's energetically cold. So that's also covered by not too cold. It's like, you know what, be careful with dairy. And for some people, you got to cut it out, basically. And the last thing on my list, my 3 rules, not too cold, not too sweet, and not too old. So that's food that's stale, but it's also anything that's been processed. So as soon as you grind grain into flour, it's been processed and it starts to lose chi. Stale food has no chi, only calories. And so it can't give you chi. It can make you fat, but it can't give you chi, basically. So, so anything that's refined is covered by the not too old. And that includes, I think Tarah mentioned something about seed oils, which I heartily concur with. That's like, no, that is just, they are a huge, massive cause of disease. Well, they are processed and refined. It's not a healthy fat because it's too old. It's processed. And so, this ties in with what Martyn was saying. Your food should have one ingredient on the label, right? It's an apple, not, all these other things. So all processed foods is when you grind food into small particles, it has a massive effect on your insulin. And so, how much insulin response you get when you eat is partially dependent on not just what you eat, like carbs or protein or fat, but like how small the bits are. If you grind something into flour, it spikes your insulin like crazy, right? So, the not too old gets rid of everything that's processed or refined, and and a lot of that stuff is likely to have chemicals like preservatives and colorants and flavor additives and whatever else, all those unpronounceable things, that rule gets rid of all the processed food, basically. So that's
Amazing.
my rules. I think everybody should think that way when they're eating. And if their health is challenged, they need to tighten up those rules, and I help them figure out which ones to tighten up and how. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Dr. Kristin, I'm sure you'll want to expand on, your version of what foods to eat and what not to eat, depending on what sensitivities a person has.
Sure. So like I said earlier, I think a great first step for anyone trying to figure out what foods resonate with their body best is an elimination diet. And I don't just use it for people who are chronically ill. I mean, I do one myself every year, at least once. I just find it a really great way to jumpstart things and kind of make sure there's no inflammation there and quell whatever is. And once that's done, I like people to follow a simple blueprint that I've sort of modified from ones that were out there. Dietitians use a plate method. I've kind of modified a plate. I think people need simple rules. I love Kayemi's 3 rules. I'm going to use those. Those are very helpful. And it does encompass so many things, whole real foods. I've also loved Michael Pollan's food rules, his simple little book that basically has like a page per rule. And it's things like, shop the periphery of the supermarket rather than the aisles, that kind of thing. But my general approach is to give people a blueprint for how to build a healthy plate of food that's mix and match, based on the foods that they have access to, that they enjoy eating. I think every bite of food that goes in your mouth should be delicious. Like, I'm not a fan of sad salads. Like, there's no reason your salad should be sad, with enough healthy, delicious fat and salt and different crunch and different kind of textures and colors. So I like people to build their plates according to their preference and also their sensitivities. But essentially I say, imagine a circle, cut it in half. Half your plate should be vegetables that grew above the ground. I start with above ground vegetables because those have the lowest glycemic index. They're not going to give that burst of sugar that like a beet or a carrot would give. Not that beets or carrots are bad, but I try to limit those, and I'll explain how I do that in a moment. But half your plate should be, the equivalent of 2 of your palms of your hand. Each one of those is a serving. So 2 servings of above ground vegetables. I don't care if they're cooked, I don't care if they're chopped, I don't care if they're pureed and blended in a smoothie, they should just be there. Ideally, over the course of the week, they should make a rainbow. So like as you're thinking about what you're growing or what you're getting from your CSA or your supermarket, think about Roy G. Biv over the course of the week, and you'll be getting, on the other half of the plate, I like to cut it in half and think about 2 different servings. One is a palm-sized serving of ideally animal protein, if you have access to animals that are high quality, humanely fed and raised and properly fed, meaning, grass for cows, it hasn't been sprayed, and wild caught for fish, that sort of thing. For plant-based eaters, eggs are fine, fish are fine, all the foods that the earth has made are fine. Proteins are usually falling though into the animal proteins, fish, eggs, and nuts and seeds. And then the last category, I invite people to consider a serving of healthy fats. Healthy being the operative word here. I agree. Any processed oils are definitely out. Those non-cold pressed, those highly refined seed oils, vegetable oils, those are verboten on my way of eating. They're just super toxic to the body. But coconut oil, lard from a healthy animal, olive oil, avocados, those are wonderful fats. And so I encourage people to think about not a full palm necessarily, unless they're on a very strict ketogenic diet, and that's tailored to the individual, but more like a tablespoon to 2 or 3 tablespoons, depending on the need of the person. And that's kind of my standard plate. And I say, eat between 2 and 3 minimum of those per day. If you're not on a intermittent fasting schedule, it should be 3 or more plates per day. I find that people are not used to that limited amount of carbs. They often have carbs as the bulk of what they're eating, and those include things like Kaimi was talking about, the grains, also fruits and root vegetables. All these things, despite how natural they are, they do become sugar very quickly in the body, and that can spike your blood sugar through the whole sort of insulin pathway. It then drops down, so you get these ups and downs in energy, which causes inflammation in the liver and in the brain, not to mention brain fog and cravings. It also, feeds your yeast and your microbiome. We haven't talked yet, or at least maybe I missed it in the beginning. We haven't really talked about the microbiome, but, so many of our cells are the trillions of organisms that live in our gut, and they actually get first crack at the food we put in. And so the trouble I have with intuitive eating is sometimes our feelings about what we want are driven by chemicals secreted by the bugs in our belly, who need to get their needs met as well. I mean, yeast secrete over 486 different chemicals that can make us feel really happy and cozy and jolly and giddy and like, oh, that was so good and wonderful, and my body's really responding well to that food, or really not when we don't feed them their carbs. So what I like people to start to think about is, just as Tarah said, like, I made this choice, and now what does that experiment feel like in my body? How am I reacting 20 minutes later? Am I having a crash from having that happy donut, or am I feeling like still really good and like that was a good thing for me? Because if you're having a crash, it could be that you're not tolerating those ups and downs in your blood sugar. If you're having a crash because you didn't have more than one donut, it could be that your yeast are overgrown and really giving you some feedback that they haven't gotten all their needs met. So it can get a little complicated. So I like to keep the carb rules very simple. So I say, if and when you're going to eat carbs, add them to your plate. Think of 5 basic rules. One is all those carbs go into one category, and you get 3 servings a day. 3 servings a day total. So that includes all the fruits, all the root vegetables, all the beans and legumes, and all the grains. That includes dairy, that includes sweeteners. So all those things go in one big category, and you get 3 a day. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is, because everyone at this point is like, well, what's my serving size? Your serving size is still your palm with no fingers and thumb. It's not how many potato latkes can I stack to heaven on that palm. It's that volume of your palm, which for most adults is between a cup or a half a cup and a cup, I would say. Kids are obviously much smaller. And again, people would say, well, I can't survive on that. Well, you can actually survive on 3 plates a day and as many other plates as you want. The carbs may not be enough for your yeast to survive. So when people start to get antsy about this, I invite them to think about whether their yeast are speaking to them. Because usually it's happening about this point in the conversation. People are getting cranky with me. The third rule I have for the carbs is to eat some healthy fats when you eat carbs. This helps to develop your satiety. It also gives you energy after the carb is quickly burned. Putting carbs in your body is like putting kindling on a fire. They give you a really quick blast of energy, and then they dissipate as your insulin is released and as your energy, your glucose is sucked into your cells. And so putting fats in with the carbs is a way to kind of put the log on the fire at the same time. So you get this nice, even energy expenditure as you, or release rather, as you metabolize that fat. Rule number 4 is not all at one time. I learned this one from my daughter, who I used to call my resident yeasty beastie. She would say, no, I don't want that gluten-free toast for breakfast. No, I don't want that apple in my lunch. I'm going to save all of my carbs for dessert after dinner. And she would, and it was, you know, to all of our detriment, as she was bouncing off the walls and couldn't sleep and was giddy and goofy and giggly, and all of her yeasties were coming back to life. So I try to have people space them throughout the day. And the final one is, if you are actually on track to eat all of your 3 minimum plates per day, you get to earn your carbs. You don't get an extra one. If you have seconds of your plate, you don't get a second of carbs, which I think of more as dessert. And I think if people follow these rules, or at least kind of strive towards them, they learn a lot about their microbiome, about their own cravings, about satiety. I've had people come to me who said, I can't ever eat that way. I need to eat every 20 minutes because I have low blood sugar. Well, you don't have low blood sugar after you put a donut in your mouth. So you have low blood sugar later because of the way that donut interacts with your endocrine system and your gut. So experimenting with this helps people to learn that when you put a log on your fire, you actually don't tank, 20 minutes to an hour later. You don't need to graze all day long. And so it's interesting to watch people learn and develop that metabolic flexibility that allows them to burn carbs when carbs are present, but also to relearn the innate knowing that we have as babies, which is how to burn fats as well for fuel. And it gives them a nice experience of what that feels like to have energy that's consistent.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to go to Martyn, because I know that you'd like to talk a little bit about fats v carbs for energy source. So we'll just do another quick round. Did you want to speak to that, Martyn?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's really interesting. I think what everyone can take away here is that most of us, we're all on this very similar page in the foods we're talking about, and we just come at it at slightly different angles here. So I come a bit more focusing really on the protein and looking into things like leptin resistance and leptin sensitivity. So getting that protein in first and getting a good amount of grams, so you're supporting the anabolic pathways in the body that you need so many grams of amino acids of protein in the diet in each meal to trigger those. But where the hair test, I really like the hair test, is that we focus on the protein, and then funnily enough, like Kristin just said, we then bring in the low carb vegetables, the above ground vegetables. I tend to be more flexible because I've had problems with fiber. And one of the research papers that I found really interesting was that a lot of people's, when they did it was only a short sample of about 60 people, but they had idiosyncratic constipation. The doctors didn't know where it was coming from. And it was actually the low fiber diet, i.e. literally the carnivore diet, which solved the digestive issues and not the higher carb. So, and that doesn't mean I'm saying fiber's bad. I'm saying there's a very individual thing. So I bring in the low carb veg, but then it's very much how it feels comfortable to that individual. Then with the hair test, what we see is really the rate of burning. And it fits in again with what's being talked about. Carbohydrates burn really quickly. Well, if your body is already showing that it burns through its oxidation rate, the rate of energy production is really quick, then you're not going to do well on carbs. It's really going to bounce you up and then crash you down really quickly. So those type of people are better adding in more fats in there, especially animal fats. It's slower burning, it's more constant energy. Then on a lot of hair tests, we see people who are slow oxidizers, and we'd see high calcium on the test, high magnesium, but low sodium, low potassium, indicating a slower rate of burning. Now, those people actually do better with more carbs and less fat. Now, again, what I find interesting, though, is that everybody still needs that fat to support the body. You've got the nerves coming down into the digestive system, and some of those nerves are actually assessing what is in the digestion in terms of not taste or anything, but in terms of amino acid content, fat content. And if you hit your protein content and your fat content needs first, they believe that's what gives the satiation signals. That says, I've got everything I need from this meal. If you don't hit those protein needs and those fat needs, the body, those nerves go searching for something else, quite often sugar. And then people get in that vicious cycle of, I need more sugar, I need more sugar. Actually, what they need is to hit their protein and fat content. But beyond those basic needs, then we look at is a person's energy production more suited to be sped up to a quicker energy release, which is more carbohydrates, or is that person more suited to the high amount of fats and oils, a more ketogenic diet is going to suit them better, a slower burning, which calms them right down, which sort of gets into what you were sort of suggesting earlier also about emotions, because then the emotions get involved in that. I'm sure when Kristin was talking about her child, when that high sugar and she's bouncing off all four walls and the emotions are going big style, but the fat would calm the body down and bring more calmness. So we can also use the hair test to sort of give that indication. Does this person, after meeting their really strong nutritional needs, do they then need more fats and oils, or do they then need more carbohydrates based on their speed of energy production?
That's fabulous, Martyn. Thank you. I love the overlaps here as well, because this leads really nicely into Tarah now in terms of, how you're feeling about what you're eating. And, I liked what, how Kaimi broke it down, that kind of pre and post, are those things that you look at as well, how you feel before and after eating?
Yes. So, well, and also to Kristin's point about sometimes your body is craving something because you have all those little yeasties going, ooh, give me sugar, right? So you go for it, and then you're going to feel the effects of that later. So it's that process of really listening to yourself, really listening to your body. Along with how your body feels, how do my emotions feel? A lot of times we'll start to feel, again, that contraction, that kind of more depressed feeling after we eat something, that isn't giving us the energy or the chi, right? And so, but I guess the main point, in terms of emotions and how we feel when we're eating, I think that the most important thing that I've learned over having my own experience with, chronic illness, in quotes, largely in my 20s, was I tried so many different things nutrition wise. I was actually going to acupuncture school. I God knows how I made it through that, but I was like, you know how intense acupuncture school is, you guys, right? So, and the biggest thing for me, I tried all these different, Chinese medicine and just all these different diets. And until that was the piece of it. But until I actually said, hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with me. My body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's giving me messages to shift or to change in some way, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with me. I stopped identifying with a diagnosis. And this is getting into different area of the nutrition. But that was the piece that I noticed that shifted everything. And then my body was able to respond to whatever I was putting into it. So, but if I kept on, feeling really bad about, oh, my body's, it's betraying me, it's all of that fighting, really that's, if I could say anything to anybody who has any sort of physical thing or other thing going on that they don't like, is that just remember that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with your body. It's doing everything perfectly. And so that was what's the shift. And that's what I work with a lot with my clients. And then their body's able to respond and they're able to actually go, oh, okay, now I'm more in tune. And of course, there's lots of other things that we do together to uncover their deepest sense of self so that they can listen. But I also wanted to say about the dairy that, traditionally dairy that's pasteurized and milk and cheese and things like that, that's processed and pasteurized is damp and cold, for the system. However, I found that raw dairy, raw milk, it has all the enzymes in it to help us digest it. And I found like a lot of nutrition for clients in that, myself included. And it's very easy for most people to digest. And it's actually very nutritious, like anything as close as you possibly can get to it, you know, coming out. It's not old, it's super new, it's super fresh, right? Same with meat. All of that makes a huge difference, as I think we've all touched on here. And also the inflammation in our body. We have foods that can cause certain inflammations, of course, but inflammation is also our body doing the work to heal. So to stop the inflammation, of course, we want to do that in a lot of cases. But again, it's this mindset of like, my body's doing something wrong. I have to. And that to me just seems to add an extra layer of, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not good enough, you know? And so clearing that emotionally can just open things up for people. Yeah.
Thank you, Tarah, amazing. And again, this is going to lead in really nicely to Kaimi, because I wanted to chat with you about, you know, you spoke earlier about the spleen and how, you know, the worry about eating can affect the spleen. But I also know that, you know, the spleen enjoys regular meal time. So I wanted to talk about timing with food, you know, the importance of regular meal times, but also, you know, the effects of you know, things like snacking can have on inflammation and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that. You know, I just I wanted to jump on. I love what Tarah said about the raw dairy, because now most dairy that you're going to find in the market, and so you have to work to find raw dairy. And so, you know, it's old, it's been processed, it's been heated to kill everything. And it loses that yang activity of having the enzymes and in there. You've actually taken the yang energy out of it when you sterilize it, basically. So I really agree with that. And the thing about cravings, you know, I'm somewhere in between where Tarah and Kristin are with that. I totally get Kristin's thing is like, oh, you tell people to be intuitive, and they'll say, oh, but God told me to eat that, right? So, and because I had a craving, right? So, but the best way I have to think about it, and I can share with people, is like, look, if it's a craving for something that's actually really good for you, have just 1 or 2 bites of it. Then wait a few minutes. If even after a couple of minutes, if it's really good for you, you still want it, but you want it a little bit less, because that actual craving for nutrition has been satisfied. If it just makes you want to eat more, and I'm thinking of, what is it? Was it the Lay's potato chips? But you can't eat just one. Remember that advertising campaign, right? So, and yeah, there's a reason for that, because that is feeding the wrong bacteria in your gut, and it's creating this addictive response. There's a whole concept of allergic addictive response, basically, right? So, and so, you know, if you want it more, then no, that's an unhealthy craving, and that seems to help people, and I like to give that advice. I'll talk about the timing in just a second. That the managing the worry, that's huge. And I do that in 2 ways. One, I mentioned, hey, it's simple rules, right? So, and then I explain them to the people and I work with them to apply them. But when people come to me, I look at their symptoms and I help them to understand that what they think of as medical symptoms, which are scary because they think of, oh, I have this condition and I'm always going to have that condition, that causes worry and upset and fear. And I spend time to reframe their symptoms into an energy imbalance. Like, oh, hey, that symptom, that symptom, that symptom, you know, those are really common symptoms of spleen Qi deficiency. So, hey, I'm thinking all we got to do is boost up your spleen Qi, and all those things go away. You don't have 3 medical problems. You got 1 energy imbalance. and you just see the relief wash over their face, that's a treatment in and of itself. Is just help people understand, like I started with, everything is just a chi imbalance, right? That's the thing, if you get that. All right, so just quickly on the timing, stomach chi is strongest in the morning, so you should have a big meal in the morning. Stomach chi is weakest in the evening, between 7 and 9 at night. So you should have a very small meal at night, is what that suggests. And that allows you to go to bed with less of a heavy meal just fermenting away in your stomach, creating all of this toxicity and so on. And the reason people aren't hungry in the morning is because they haven't digested last night's meal. So, and there's actually so much insomnia that can be cured by just convincing people to move their calories from evening to morning, because you're obeying the body's rhythms. And so that's one aspect of timing. The other is that it takes work. It takes energy. It's work to digest food. So you should give your digestive tract a rest. Don't just keep throwing stuff in there. Eat food. I love the putting the log on the fire instead of the kindling kind of analogy. Now I can't remember who said that, but I love that, right? So, start to learn to eat logs, not kindling, so that you're not desperate to eat in between, because it's important that you give your digestion a rest. You're wasting chi just digesting food needlessly if you're snacking all of the time. And from a medical perspective, every time you eat, doesn't matter what you eat, every time you eat, you get an insulin spike, but you also have what's called postprandial inflammation. You have an inflammatory response in the gut from eating. And it takes 5 or 6 hours for that to subside. And so if you're constantly snacking, you're constantly stoking the fires of inflammation. And so, getting to foods that actually give you sustained energy and then giving your digestion a break, is conserving your chi, basically, to bring it back to that perspective. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that. So
Thanks, Kaimi. Dr. Kristin, would you like to talk about some of the symptoms that can start to clear up, with the elimination diet that you've recommended?
Sure. And I'll just also acknowledge that not everyone needs an elimination diet to clear up symptoms. I mean, following some of the basic rules that the others have outlined can be very effective and go a long way to helping people with things.
We're losing you, Dr. Kristin. Did you want to turn your video off and see if that helps?
Are ailing them. Is that any better, Sarah?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, I don't know where you lost me, but I guess I was just going to say that there's a lot of people these days talking about how their brain's not working, or they're having a brain fart, or early Alzheimer's, or a senior moment. And I want to just say, from someone who's been through the medical training system, that when I was a medical student in the late 90s, nobody was talking that way. And when I became a resident a few years later, it's almost like there was this kind of epidemic of, early Alzheimer's conversations and brains not working. And it's only gotten worse. I think a lot of people nowadays, especially kids, don't know what it feels like to really have a clear mentation and cognition and be able to focus. ADHD obviously is diagnosed willy-nilly and left, right, front, left, and center, or whatever. And it's, to me, not the normal state of affairs. And I think that a lot of things that we've sort of normalized can get a lot better when we start eating properly. And sometimes that just means cutting out, following Kaimi's rules. I love it. Like, if you take out you take out all the processed foods, and then by gosh, you're eating whole, real foods that the earth and animals made for you. And that's huge. I mean, that will get you 90% of the way. And for some people, that's enough to feel amazing. And so I think if people take these steps, they'll start to realize, wow, I can function at a much higher level than I've ever realized. And it's possible to go through a day without getting sleepy after lunch, or to go through a day without getting kind of lost and forgetting why I walked into a room. So I would say the biggest thing I see people talking about is how their brains clear up when they start eating, real foods and taking out the junk. The other thing people notice is that things that they might have felt for a long time, like me with the, gassy, bloaty, farty after every meal my entire life till I was 42 and did my first elimination diet, can go away. Like, it doesn't have to hurt to digest your food. Even though there is a little postprandial inflammation, as Kaimi mentioned, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. You don't have to get this sort of feeling of I have to sleep, or I have to unbuckle my belt, or I need to shift in my seat so that my intestines can move around properly. Actually, you can just feel great after eating. And that's another thing that people talk about. And then the other thing that I would say healthy, normal people notice, that they have a lot more energy when they're eating foods that are real and not taxing themselves with, what I would call non-foods that deplete the chi, as many have said. So people start to feel really different, and they get a higher level of vitality than many of them ever knew was possible.
Amazing, Kristin. Thank you so much. This has been a really incredible conversation. I'm just going to do a last 5-minute round just to finish up with any last comments and just to let people know how they can get in contact with you. So Martyn.
Okay, so you can contact me. I've got a website, hairdiagnostics.com, and my email address is Martyn, spelled with a Y, at hairdiagnostics.com. You can get me there. And that's probably the easiest and best place to initially make contact with me.
Any last comments?
Last comment? No, I just find it interesting that you've got 4 people here who don't know each other, but they've basically been saying very similar things, just coming at it from different angles. So I think that sort of strongly supports, in a weird way, what we've all been saying, for us to unite in this way and say very similar things.
Beautiful. Thank you, Martyn. Tarah.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, and for everyone that's been speaking today. It's just been such a pleasure to be here with you all, and yeah, I agree. It's all, there's such a similar thread through all of it. So you can find me at tarahlong.com. That's probably the easiest way. My contact form is there. I'm also on Instagram at tarahlong, and if you're on Telegram, the CPN Conscious People's Network. We just changed the name, so I have to remember that. There's a lot of cool stuff happening over there. And the last thing I'll say is I love coconut oil, and I use it for and on everything for years, and it has not done me wrong. So that's just a last little quip there.
Fabulous. Thank you. Kaimi.
Okay, so people can find me at accunect.com. So that's ACCUNECT.com. And that's our website for the healing system that myself and my wife, Sarah Simone, has put together, which integrates, Chinese medicine theory and applied kinesiology and lots of other insights into, balancing people's energy without using needles, and can be done at a distance. I think I totally concur with what Martyn and Tarah have said. Is like, it's lovely to see the agreement of so much, slightly different angles, but so much agreement about the benefits of choosing the right foods. But what I find is that if you can balance somebody's energy and balance their beliefs and their emotions, which is also part of AccuNect, then they come into a place where they're able to make better choices. And, they're able to listen to the advice. They have a clearer mind. And, yes, the diet is super important, but the synergy, of actually balancing their energy, and so that their instinctive reactions, because I loved what Kristin said about the yeasty beasties in the gut or whatever. If your body's out of balance, your instinctive reactions are often craving the wrong thing. And so I give, for my clients, I give them dietary advice, but I also balance their energy. And so I just think that's really important to say, because that emotional component, I mean, Walter Cannon, who's one of like the founders of psychoneuroimmunology, he wrote a paper back in 1915 observing that when you're under strong emotion, your intestinal motility completely stops. So I talked about cold earlier, stops your intestinal motility. Strong emotion does as well. So, it's hard to get the digestion sorted out by food alone. We need to manage stress in the body as well. And so, because I always just like to put that holistic perspective in there. So, yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Kaimi. Dr. Kristin.
I will echo what others have said. I'm really grateful to you, Sarah, for putting this together, and to everyone who took the time to show up with such heart and all their wisdom. And I also just want to give a shout out to the humans who are listening, who have sat through this whole thing. I think it can be very challenging for many of us to consider changing something about the way we eat food. It can be very threatening. It can feel scary. Our yeast can be in a complete rebellious uproar. So if you've managed that through this whole thing and you're still here, good on you. So in terms of how to reach me, I'm at KristinReihmanMD.com. You can also, I think Sarah said you would share a link to a free little ebook I've written for people who are considering elimination diets, to help them stock their cabinet with homemade whole real foods that they can rely on in bulk as they move through 3 weeks of an elimination. So I'm happy to share that with people. And if you sign up for that free book, then you'll be on my newsletter list, and you'll hear other things from me. You'll be able to connect with me that way too. So thanks for this opportunity. It was really fun talking with you all.
Thank you, Kristin. I'll put that link with the video underneath the video and with the video. Thank you all. It's been absolutely fascinating. My name's Sarah Chave, and you can find me at www.replenishing.com, and also on the People's Health Alliance website as an international ambassador. So thank you all for listening, and I hope that you've enjoyed the roundtable as much as I have today. Bye for now.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you.